I think it's quite a tell that Kamala doesn't have any children of her own. It's something that I think is concerning. I know that the left freaked out and Taylor Swift posted a picture of her with a cat when JD Vance accurately said that you don't want a bunch of like childless cat ladies running things, and I agree with that. And I also agree that similarly in the exact same vein that it is concerning when you have basically a coalition of childless cat women and so many homosexual men, people like Cory Booker. I don't know if everybody knows he's homosexual, but and in these positions of power who are informing policy very removed from a certain kind of compassion. And I know people, they tried to make it seem like you meant, oh, women that are struggling with fertility issues. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people that have zero inclination, desire toward family, but they want power, right? And it genuinely scares me when I think about this because they are naturally nihilistic. They're where they gain that power and that assertion from within themselves. To me, is quite troubling, and their ability to inflict pain. You know, I did a lot of translating, pardon, the pieces that the journalists that exposed Emmanuel Macron's upbringing and the fact that his wife was actually born a man. He spoke about this at length about when you have someone who was raised up like this, someone who was sexually assaulted when he was young, introduced to sort of these perverted sexual things. We're talking about so much sexual perversion in the government. Their ability to inflict pain on others almost knows no bounds. There's an element of a sociopathic nature that's instilled in them at a very young age. And I think we have too many of these sociopaths that are in government, their ability to lie. Like I say to people, pause, forget what you think about Kamala, whether you're voting for her, whether you're not voting for her. We've now established as a fact that she put a fake woman in her book and tried to present this Black woman as her grandmother. What kind of a person
would do that?
Yes. Like, what do you think about what that takes to find the photo, whether it's photoshopped, whether it's a photo of you with a different person, whatever. You put it in your book, you lie. You are sealing the identity of a Black person, knowing that actually you descend from slave owners, right? And you feel nothing. And you keep this up because you realize nobody's fact checked it. You're going around, you're trying to blackify yourself, and you feel nothing. What does that tell you about what that person is capable of? That they don't have basic morality.
Ruthless, unprincipled person. And you pointed this out earlier. What happens when you have no legacy?
Yeah.
You don't have any interest in continuity. You're not thinking like you do when you have children, grandchildren, or when you adopt somebody who is actually a child and you participate in raising them. Mm-hmm. And I hate to do this as an analogy, but dogs are part of our families, right? People love their dogs, but you didn't have the dog, you adopted the dog. Well, if you adopt a child, that becomes your child. You raise that child. Now, she adopted 2 teenagers, which, that doesn't count. They're already grown.
Who adopted a teenager?
She adopted her husband's 2 children.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't count.
No.
So what happens is, what is her stake in tomorrow? I mean, if you went out and you adopted a 9-month-old, a year and a half, 2-year-old, 4-year-old, and you're raising them, you've got an interest in tomorrow. Mm-hmm. But you see, that's like that example I gave you of, you come down the jungle trail with an antelope across your shoulders and you see this war party about to fall on your village. Nobody's looking. Do you sneak off or do you sound the alarm and maybe die to sacrifice for your village and your people and your descendants? Or do you just turn around and run?
Kamala turns around and runs.
Yeah.
She has no stake in tomorrow.
No stake in this. And her connections are suspect, but her connections make her vulnerable. It's like, I was in California when a lot of this was going on, and she and Willie Brown got detailed in the LA Times and the San Francisco Chronicle a lot about what they were doing. So you're in your 20s, and this is 30 years ago, and you're getting paid $72,000 a month for showing up at 2 meetings a month, maybe 15 hours for the month, and everybody else on this panel that you're on is 65 to 70 years old with a lifetime in medicine, and you have absolutely no medical background, and you're getting paid $72,000 a year because you're a mistress to somebody that's 60 years old and has put you in there, and then he gets you sort of motion to another aspect of the same setup, and you get 120,000 a year for showing up for 2 meetings a month, and she misses 20% of them. And this is 30 years ago. $120,000 30 years ago is making $250,000 now.
Wow. And people need to know this is the true story of Kamala. People aren't making this up because it's election season. You can go back and read the article.
Yes.
In the LA Times, San Francisco Chronicle. I've read them. They were basically like, this woman is sleeping around and she's making a ton of money. You know, she slept with Willie Brown and he's just putting her into
Montiel.
Yeah, that's right. Putting her into positions of power.
And then there's the other thing, too. They talked about how she got on with the DA's office in Alameda County and also some other things, and even getting to be U.S. Senator, which I found very peculiar because, you know, now senators are elected by constitutional amendment. They used to be appointed by the states. She is the first person, the only person in California's history to run with no Republican opponent for U.S. Senator.
Wow. I did not know that.
Yeah, see, it's interesting, the whole 9 yards. And then there's another suspect thing, One West Bank. George Soros was the major investor in One West Bank. Mnuchin, later the Obama administration, and for 1 year in the Trump administration before he got fired, he was CEO. This is when they were having that mortgage foreclosure fraud situation. All right? I had 3 neighbors lost their properties behind this fraud. So just about every county in California returned indictments against Mnuchin and One West Bank. There were 5,200 plus counts of indictments returned. 5,200. Well, Soros and Mnuchin raised a lot of money for Kamala, quite a few $1 million for her to run for the office of Attorney General of the state of California. When she got elected, she used her authority to consolidate all of these indictment counts and dismiss them. 3 weeks later, George Soros sells One West Bank for $3.42 billion. And then they raised a lot of money to get her elected as U.S. Senator without Republican opposition. Now, can you imagine California with no Republican candidate running against the Democratic Party candidate?
Incredible.
See, that's how she gets in. And at that point, she was Indian.
Oh, yeah. She was sworn in as Indian.
Yeah. So she wasn't talking about being black. I find something else, too. If you are part white and you're part black, what are you as far as Americans concerned? You're black.
Mm-hmm.
If you're part Asian and part black, America takes you as black. So how does she get to be Indian, recognized as such, if she's got black in her? She doesn't.
No, she's without question Irish Indian. There's no question about it.
No.
She's Irish Indian.
You get this mythology in, but she's easy to control because, A, she's lazy. I know a lot of lawyers, now senior members of a firm that I recruited to law school way back when at UCLA back in early 70s. And they'll tell you, she was not one that put in a lot of work when she prepared for a case. She'd shorten her hemline up every day of the trial, and somebody's supposed to be impressed. And we have somebody that counted on other people doing the work, and she did the casting couch thing to get to the top. But at the top, what are you going to do?
Exactly. If you're not qualified.
You're going to deal with Putin? He's probably got something waiting in the far wing of the Kremlin that looks a lot better than this 60-year-old woman. Xi Jinping, you know, he's going to be inscrutable. And No.
Well, you even saw when Putin sat down with Tucker, he was very clear. He's like, I don't deal with your president's. He heavily implied it's just a show, and I deal with the CIA. Like your presidents are not running the country. I deal with the CIA, and this was why the media freaked out when Tucker was going out there because this is kind of, I think now a known thing that the people that purport to be in charge are just puppets, and there's people behind the scenes that are pulling the strings, and it seems like that is very much the military-industrial complex. We're talking about Halliburton, we're talking about the CIA. You know, the war machine is telling them what to do, what to say. They just need someone that can at least read the teleprompter. And Joe Biden stopped being that. You know, he stopped being able to even just read the teleprompter. So they said, okay, we've got to go to our B option, which is Kamala.
And then look at this. There was no primary vetting.
I know. It's incredible.
There wasn't even anything the old time way where you had convention ballots going on. The last time she put herself to the test, she had to withdraw early in the primary season because she wasn't doing anything at all. And then you have this other thing where how do you jump from being the least popular vice president or president in the country's history if you take the last 70 some years of polling, and all of a sudden you become a front runner? It just doesn't happen. But then you look at what's going on with the press that, I'm astonished at the press now. It's like they're the propaganda engines for the Democratic Party.
They've always been that, you know?
Well, no, they weren't. Not back when. You'd have a report that said, okay, Donald Trump claimed that so on and so forth. Meanwhile, his Democratic opponent made a counterclaim. You wouldn't have Donald Trump lied about this or Donald Trump made a false assertion.
Yeah, you're right. I guess what I mean to say is that I think the media, I shouldn't say has always been Democratic. Whichever candidate was going to get them the war they wanted. And I think right now we are on the brink of they want World War III. I've been saying this for 2 years on my show. It's been very obvious the way that they're covering everything. We're going to get dragged into another war. And I don't think that I actually know, because he has said this, that Donald Trump is their war candidate. You know, Trump has been very much, he started out much more isolationist, full stop. He was like, every boy needs to come back home, America first. Now he definitely has already said that he doesn't support what's happening in Ukraine, that we shouldn't be involved in Ukraine. That's not going to work for the war class. They're laundering money over there. I think they want to make this thing bigger. And Kamala is just an empty vessel. She'll do what they'll say. Trump is got his guts. He's got his wits about him. He's going to say, I don't want to do this. I'm not going to do that. He's too strong of a person.
He's somebody actually in charge, not a figurehead.
Right.
Now, Bill Clinton.
And they can't have that.
Bill Clinton was a hillbilly, but he had leadership capacity and he was a strong man. I remember something that I saw him do that was very fascinating. 40 some years ago, they had a coalition down here in Arkansas, and they met up in Jonesboro at a synagogue. I think it was Jonesboro. And I went down there to consult with them, and they had an organization that had farm workers, League of Women Voters, Jewish Defense League, etc., and a bunch of ministers. And these night riders were coming by in flatbed trucks with shotguns and rifles, intimidating everybody. So they got the bright idea of, let's call the governor. He's a young guy. So they did. Bill Clinton showed up, buffed out dude, big, and he had his Arkansas State Police guards, and he made them wait inside the synagogue or church, and he gave his coat to the preacher, and there was this guy with a bullhorn over there agitating. He went over and knocked the thing out of his hand. The big guy picked him up, rammed him up against the wall. His feet were about this high off the ground. Fished in his pocket, took his wallet out, looked through it, put it back in, and said, your name's so-and-so, this is where you live. And if I see anybody, hear about anybody coming back here to mess with my constituents. I'm getting you. And he threw the guy down, and somebody came up with a shotgun. He punched him, butt stroked the guy with his own shotgun, and walked down the sidewalk, knocked 4 or 5 people to the ground, and said, "Anybody want a piece of this?" I said, "Damn." All right. I'm impressed. But you see, they don't make them like that now for the Democratic Party. They don't have any Give 'em Hell Harrys. They don't, who was a captain in the artillery in World War One and decorated. They don't have any John F. Kennedys who had PT 109 chopped in two by a Japanese destroyer. They don't have any FDRs who was Secretary of the Navy from a family of warriors, least of all Teddy Roosevelt, who led the Rough Riders up with the 10th Cavalry up San Juan Hill. You don't have that. You don't even have Lyndon Baines Johnson, who was an interesting guy. You don't have people like that now. You've got some wishy-washy somebodies that would be nobodies if they didn't have the lifetime political connections where there is obvious corruption. You, for your entire adult life, have been on a government payroll, but you're a multimillionaire. Just doesn't equate. Not at all.
Right, right.
So, and by the way, you get people who are very vulnerable. And when you have somebody that's vulnerable, you can control them.
Emmanuel Macron, Barack Obama with his history, homosexual relationships.
Biden.
Yep, Biden.
Let me tell you about Biden.
Yeah.
Fox, 2.5 years ago, did a moot court thing where I was the judge on it in New Jersey. So we kind of got a jury selected, and they were going to play grand jury. Was there probable cause to believe that Hunter Biden committed an act in violation of the Foreign Agents Registration Act, FARA? And we had the technician who worked on the laptops. And by the way, I said laptops, plural. There were 3, not 1 like the press is saying.
Wow.
And he downloaded all of them and had the documentation where he got permission from a perhaps high Hunter Biden. So we got to spend hours going through the laptops. There's a lot of incriminating stuff in there. Like, for example, I'm led to believe that one of the reasons that Trump wouldn't turn over the documents out of Mar-a-Lago is because they were deeply incriminating against Biden and Obama from what was being said on those laptops. This fool, this crackhead, even had White House tapes on that laptop. And they still have White House tapes, but they're not just auditory, they're visual. And some of the things in there, were there wartime things going on, would be treason. One of them concerned about backing the U.S. Navy off of aggressive counter-patrolling of the Chinese Navy in the South China Sea when they were trying to build these concrete emplacements on these slightly submerged atolls so they could claim 200 miles of Chinese territory around them, and they wanted the Navy to back off. That's all on there. And the admirals, 2 months later in military times, were complaining about them being told to stand down and how disgusted they were with that. And there was money being talked about. You heard that thing about $10 million being mentioned.
For the big guy?
Yeah, but it wasn't just to the big guy. It was to Obama, Biden. And in the video from the White House tapes, there's this Chinese guy talking about he'd made $100 million deposit in the business that Hunter was involved with, and each of them got 10%. That's, I mean, it may have been AI, but what was in there, it may not have been either, and somebody needs to look at it. And by the way, to show you what they're doing with weak people and being able to get away with stuff with what they've done with the press, The President of the United States is Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. He can override any general. He can give orders to the generals. He's chief diplomat, and he can override the Secretary of State, who works for him as a cabinet officer. All right? So what that means is just like he has unlimited pardoning power. Nobody can gainsay the president when it comes to pardoning. Nobody can gainsay the president when it comes to either classifying or declassifying in whole or part any document by any means he chooses. The case on that is United States Department of Navy versus Egan, EGAN, 1988. If you look into the whole thing, there are multiple concurring opinions, and they say he has absolute authority to classify or declassify.
Right.
There's an old case from 1803, a very famous one called Marbury versus Madison, that says the president is under no obligation to comply with an unconstitutional act of Congress. It set the principle for the Supreme Court being able to, or a court, appellate court, under appropriate circumstances, for being able to declare an act of Congress unconstitutional. And when they came up with this thing with the archivists have authority to dictate what they're going to take into the archives, that usurps the constitutional authority of the president, which cannot be done by legislation. So that act is unconstitutional. And considering what we were looking at from those laptops, the downloads, it looks like there was some very incriminating stuff that Trump did not want to surrender to the archivists because that would allow the culprits to get control of them and cover their tracks.
Got it. Okay, because I was wondering, I was saying, for me, it's like, why isn't Trump just released to the public? You know, I remember how much collusion was happening, even with big tech, back when Jack Dorsey was running Twitter. He wasn't really running Twitter. It was more like the Democratic Party was running Twitter. But I remember going through text messages and the Ashley Biden diary stuff, but also some claims of incest between Hunter Biden and his niece. Hunter Biden was texting with Joe, his parents, saying like about her claims or whatever it was, and the media just left this alone.
Well, that's the salacious stuff.
Yeah.
If you get into what's on the laptops in terms of he thought he was going to be a porn star.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's interesting some of the people he's having sex with on the videos that are in there. It's pretty graphic.
Mm-hmm.
Full frontal or back, whatever you want to put it.
Were there other political daughters that were in?
Yeah.
I think because I remember seeing someone that looked like someone, but I was like,
it was someone. You can see it in there. I mean, and they cleaned it up, but there are three of them. 1, 2, 3. In that black box behind the Corvette in the garage, there was some dialogue about, did your friends get a chance to look at the box? You know, this kind of thing, and big guy and all of this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
So it's we know nothing. I mean, it's just incredible. The public, they give us 10%, and then the 90% is just being completely hidden.
But you see, there are ways of getting it. But you cannot rely on the mainstream media, because nowadays there's been a thing that has changed. They're into the ratings game because too many of them are hooked up with visual media now instead of just the print media. It was one thing when a place like New York or Los Angeles or Nashville or Memphis had multiple daily newspapers, and they were competing to see who sold the most and who got the most commercial revenue from people putting ads in there to win. How many newspapers you have from Nashville? 1. How many you have from Memphis? 1. How many you have for Los Angeles? 1. There's no competition, so they've expanded into being part of a communications empire where, like in Memphis, the same family that controls the commercial appeal owns all of Channel 3, half of Channel 5, and a quarter of Channel 13, and a quarter of Channel 24, and it's all incestuously controlled, so they're not competing to be most accurate in penetrating and in depth when it comes to the news. They use the opportunity to editorialize. Instead of there was a holdup, the police reported on such and such street in downtown Nashville, blah, 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 blah. They'll say, once again, we have an example where there needs to be gun control. That's not the event, that's editorialization.
Right.
Put that on the op-ed page.
Oh, of course.
So you don't have that kind of accurate stuff, but that stuff is available because there are entities where you can get it. But there's a funny thing that's becoming apparent. Some of the best sources of information are no longer national. You can go on China's website, which is a huge thing, and you will find that they have more accurate reporting of what's going on in the United States than you will get from an American paper.
Absolutely.
You will find, too, that some of the most interesting domestic sources have a little caveat. Say this is involved with matters of national security. Therefore, please be advised that if you enter the website, the Department of Defense may find it necessary to...
No way.
Yeah.
Pay you a visit.
No, not just that visit, but this kind of visit. 24 years ago, I was guest of the DEA out there in Los Angeles. They had 4 centers they took me to. One of them I found very intriguing. It was a room about size of this, I guess it would be living room you guys have downstairs, bigger than that. And from floor to ceiling, there are all these monitors, and it's people's computers. I thought that they had seized these computers. Oh no, we got basically a peep warrant, and we looked in on one person who is of interest. So now we are going through the computers of everyone that this person was in communications with, and they're laughing about some of the salacious stuff that's on there. And then they said, I want you to come in and watch this. I said, what are we looking at? Said, we are putting a surveillance device on this guy's automobile. We have been using some that we have to replace regularly because they are battery powered, but we're going to hook this one up with the car's electric system so we won't have to worry about it. So I'm looking at this vehicle parked in a driveway in a residence, and I said, well, where are you guys? So this camera's about 1.5 miles down the street.
Wow.
So, wow. So you see this van pull up, 3 guys get out, they threw down one of these lay down on roller platforms, and they scooted under it. And the guy took one of these Slim Jims and popped the door lock. They opened up the hood. They made the installation. Didn't take them more than a minute or two. And so now we got this guy so we can know what he's doing, got sound and everything else. And this was 25 years ago.
Yeah, the technology they have is absolutely incredible.
Tell you another thing, right up here in Jackson, Tennessee, been almost 40 years ago, I had a drug trial there. Went on for 3 weeks. They gave a demonstration of the technology to the jury. I said, oh, we are in trouble. They have this grain silo in Jackson on the railroad tracks. So about 3-4 miles away, there is a playground. So they're giving a live demonstration, and this kid's on the playground with a basketball. So he's standing there, and they quickly do staged in zooms. You can read it's a Voight basketball. I said, oh, this is deep. Then they went in a little bit more and it said, inflate 13 PSI. I said, oh, wow, that's from 6 miles away. So they focused on the next door neighbor of my client. You couldn't see in because of the reflection of the light. They put a polarized filter on the thing so you could see in. The woman was drinking coffee, and you could read the headline on the newspaper. Then you could start reading the article on the newspaper, and this was 6 miles away. I said, oh, we're in bad trouble. So they did a final demonstration.
When was this?
This was in Jackson. This is like
Year-ish.
1986. So they did another thing. Myself and the prosecution, we wrote a note on a yellow pad. They said a satellite was passing overhead. It was reasonably clear day. The marshal went outside, held the pad up. We could see real time on the monitor. He got the pad held up so the satellite's 20-some thousand miles up in orbit, and we could read what we wrote on there. I said, oh.
Well, it's actually, when you say that, it's so
trouble.
funny that they try to present to the public that everything's always like an intelligence failure, like Trump near assassination attempt. I mean, you're telling me that you don't have the tech to protect Trump when he's at a rally. Like, we have the Secret Service and the government crawling the place, but you guys just don't have the tech to be able to see that someone's scaling a rooftop. I mean, because obviously the technology that they have, the government has, is like decades advanced from what they give to the people. And so when you see these situations, it's incredulous. It's incredulous that they did not know. It's because they did not want to know. And it's one of these situations where I believe there's always a lackey. There's always these stories that you're told about this one crazy lone gunman. I never buy it. Didn't buy it with MLK. I don't buy it with JFK.